Okay, we are back today with another Infinite Layers. Today we're joined by Dima from LayerN. Today we're going to be diving into what LayerN is, how it was created, and a lot of the thought process behind building it. And we're here with us today. We have Dima. So, do you want to give us an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Nader Gash, for inviting me. So essentially, my introduction before to crypto, I was focusing on AI research, neurotech research, and discovered crypto early 2021 and went essentially full time, abandoning everything that I was working before. Started by building DEX and Solana together with like my co-founders, and then eventually came to the decision that the best thing to build is LayerN, which I can talk more about later.
So, you worked previously in this industry for how long?
So essentially, since 21, it's been like more than 3 years now since I've been in crypto. And Layer N specifically, I think we count that we started in March 23. So I would say 2 years prior to starting Layer N, like was working on different things in crypto.
All right. So, if someone asks you for the elevator pitch or like a 60-second overview of what LayerN is, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, like the shortest version is like build applications with infinite compute and restricted composability and latency. The more longer ones is that like essentially our goal is like to figure out how to build a rollup where each application can have their own dedicated compute, their own dedicated sequencers, their own dedicated resources, like to be able to scale to whatever level they need, which means that each individual app in layer n can have like hundreds of thousands transactions per second. It can have minimal latency while being able to compose with each single application. So it's essentially taking this idea of a single environment of single mega computer and scaling it to hundreds of machines, scaling to hundreds of resources, so you can have like this super performant layer where you can forget about all of the steps that's usually associated with Web3.
So, it's basically a shared compute platform. It's kind of like a shared network, similar
Exactly.
to something
So
like Solana or something, right?
yeah, so essentially the difference, let's say, between like Solana EVMs of the world is that they're always like run on a single VM. They're always run on a single computer. And we are trying to figure out like, hey, how can we do it better? And essentially through sharding of like applications to different machines, like we can make sure that like a DEX in layer n can have like their own sequencer. They can sequence transactions separately. They can process all of this separately. So that way you don't have to worry about congestion. So you can build whatever applications you want compared to, let's say, like a EVM or like SVM, where I need to think every single day, like how much compute can I use? Like what are other applications are doing, right? Even like taking a look at Solana right now, and you realize like, oh damn, like I'm having a trouble like lending my transaction. And if I'm building a, let's say like an order book protocol, like my market makers are getting screwed. If I'm building a lending protocol, I need to worry about liquidations and a lot of other factors, which essentially like get a lot more complicated when you have like this single VM environment. With us, like you can build a DEX as a single application, have their own sequencer, but at the same time, like this DEX can send messages to every single other application within layer and every single other, like so to speak, app or EVM, etc. So that way you have like the perfect environment, which is only like possible to achieve like with architectures that we provide.
So, if you all are not EVM, correct? You all have your own VM.
So that's like the nice part. I think like we realize that like a lot of developers are Solidity developers, right? It's like really hard to tell everyone like, hey, come learn Rust, like, hey, come learn like whatever language we have. And so what we offer is like an environment where you can like come in and like build an application in Rust. We call it XVM. And we also expanding that environment to other programming languages such as Python, TypeScript, et cetera, et cetera. But we also realize that like 90 plus probably percent of crypto developers are Solidity. So what we offer to them is that they can spin out their own EVM. Like we are spinning out our own EVM platform as well. So we do have an optionality for developers to just continue using Solidity, but also offer an alternative if they want to build something more performant, or they just know Rust more than Solidity, they can come build their Rust program as well. So that's kind of like our goal, is to be as unopinionated as possible around like how developers build their application, but more so like the idea is that like each developer needs like their own dedicated compute.
So if someone was to start building on Layer N today, what would be some of the languages and VMs that are supported like at the moment versus kind of what will be supported in the future?
Yeah, so right now, like we support our own custom VM, which like essentially uses Rust, as we call it XVM. So that's like part one of cohort of our developers who are building on top of it. And we are right now like preparing like for a public release like EVM environment. So people could either write like an app specific applications on top of a VM environment or launch on our own EVM using they just want to be part of the ecosystem. So essentially for developers, value prop, like I can Rust write either in Solidity, Rust, and I don't need to worry about liquidity fragmentation on the network.
So I guess what is the current status of the network? Are you all on testnet, mainnet, and what are some of the timelines that you're working towards?
Yeah, I mean, essentially right now we are in an auditing stage. We are right now auditing our first XVM, we call it Nord. And that application aims to bring like high performance DEXs like on chain. And when I'm talking about high performance, like the way we measure Nord's performance is not against existing platforms in crypto, but try to measure it against Coinbase, Binance, Nasdaq, and really the goal there, like how we can build the fastest like exchange on chain and make it like essentially the place for people to trade. And with that product, like we aim to launch like with a few partners like for building exchanges such as NOS, such as SUSE, and we have like a couple of other products in a pipeline. And the goal there is like every crypto platform aggregates around DEXs. So we need to make sure that like our DEXs like have the best technology, have the best liquidity, the best resources. So that's like the phase one of like what we're aiming to launch. But the second phase is like focusing more on the VM environment and making it more accessible for all the developers because not everyone would want to learn Rust. Not everyone even need like this complexity. And that will be like our next stage of like launching EVM environment, and we already have a couple of people building on top of dedicated EVM nodes.
Nice. Yeah, I think if you can support both Rust and Solidity, you've kind of hit the sweet spot and you've captured the large majority of the developer market and mindshare. Because, like, obviously Solidity is not going anywhere, but Rust is definitely growing. And I think often a lot of from what I can tell, like higher quality advanced engineers prefer Rust. And, so therefore, yeah, you have a good capture there. I think one of the things that got me excited when I started working at EigenLayer and looking at some of the products being built on EigenDA, that you all had this demo of a DEX and the real time UI was live on testnet, and all of the transactions were kind of like being simulated there, and it was just really really high throughput. So can you talk about some of the focus in terms of getting it to be something as close to something like Coinbase, Nasdaq, or real time and high throughput as possible? Like, what are some of the metrics that you're kind of looking to emulate and benchmark?
Yeah. I think like recently a lot of teams like been focusing on like how we can build the fastest EVMs, the fastest SVM. But I think like that target of like trying to just like build the fastest general environment is like really difficult and might not be the best one because if I'm trying to scale like SVM to like a million transactions, like there's so many unknowns of how people are going to use this platform, right? Solana spent like 2 years like trying to patch it up, like to make it sure that it's viable because like essentially like we had like so many situations in Solana where like no one expected this to happen. No one expected that people will be using the chain they're using. But our core idea is that if we focus on specific use cases, it's a lot easier to optimize their application. It's a lot easier to figure out like how do I build my platform in such a way that like it can scale a lot more easily to hundreds of thousand transactions a second. So our focus is like how can we provide like the most bare metal like environment for people to figure out like, hey, I'm building this application. I have this types of transactions. I have this type of computational needs, and this is how I will scale. Instead of like trying to chase like this idea of like building the own like the big VM like capable of handling like all of the applications at the same time. And the reason as well is like looking at like how Web2 scales. Like it's not like everyone was trying to figure out how do we build a computer which can handle like Coinbase, Binance, etc. Uh, on the same platform, right? Like that's something that's like no one has done in Web2. Everyone tried to figure out like how can I scale individually my application, and that's what we're had it, and that's what we focused on. And in general, like the motivation as well is like, hey, like SEVM, let's say it's like the sandbox of this size, like of what's possible to do. SVM is probably larger because higher TPS. And our question is like, how can we make it like 100x bigger? Like, because I think like if we provide environments which can handle like 1 million transactions a second, the sandbox is so much larger that we can see new applications appear, new use cases being applied. And that's like essentially like our thought process there as well.
So, what does the like engineering team look like at Layer N, and how has that been built over the past year? And like, how many co-founders do you have?
Yeah, so essentially we are a team of like three co-founders, and essentially two of us like more on BD side, including myself. Like I used to code a lot, but now like definitely a lot less time to do that. And we have like a brilliant CTO who is leading charge of like all of our technical development. In terms of engineering talent, like we have like incredibly talented team from backgrounds like such as like Cisco, VMware, like Dfinity, a lot of Cosmos protocols background as well. And essentially have like a really well packed of engineers, like with decades of experience, like who joined our team, and we've been like gradually scaling it like since our first seed round announcement. And really, the philosophy has always been like, how can we attract like the best talent? How we can work with the best people? How we can build something that will like stand the test of time, like for decades to come. And definitely been very picky and very selective in that process, but really happy with having like really amazing people join our team.
Yeah,
Awesome.
speaking a little bit to some of the stuff we've talked about, but also going off course a little bit. I've seen a lot of discussion around, apps versus infrastructure, and people are hyper over indexed on either like supporting one or the other or both, I guess, even in some circumstances. But I find it interesting because like I used to be more okay, we have way too much infrastructure, we need more apps. The more I learned about actually building an app, the more I realized that a lot of the use cases that we'd like to support are not possible yet because the infrastructure isn't there yet. And the people that are building out high quality UX are essentially often making a lot of trade offs. They're doing a lot of hacks to kind of make optimistic updates on the UI to kind of make it feel faster than it actually is and things like that. So I think I've gotten to the point, the realization that we need both. It's really challenging to build a high quality app today, but if you can do it, you can probably do really well. But if we look at the infrastructure in the Web 2 space and the, types of things that are being built there and the speed and the scale at which, that's happening, we need a lot of block space, and we need a lot of improvements in speed and latency and throughput. So I think stuff like this, is fitting in exactly there. But we need more of them. Like I don't think we need just one or two or five. I think we need probably hundreds of shared compute blockchains like Layer N. We also need application specific rollups that are high throughput and low cost. And you put all that together, and then you have this um, amount of block space and hopefully compute that's can support those types of use cases. But then you get to the next question is like, what is the interoperability story like start looking like there? So I'm kind of curious, like, what are your thoughts around that question? Um, I know Vitalik tweeted something out yesterday or the day before saying like we're a lot closer than a lot of people think on making interop actually feel good in terms of like the UX. But like, what is your thoughts around the fragmentation and the fix for that fragmentation?
Yeah, maybe I guess I feel a bit more pessimistic than Vitalik around how close we are in terms of interoperability. I think like the biggest challenge around interoperability is that you have like a lot of big players, big rollups, and now you have like 100 rollups like right now, like we're about to be launched hundreds of rollups. And so the question is like, how do you get everyone together? And it's how do you essentially get all of these people to come up with a single standard and apply to it, right? And I think like when you have especially optimistic rollups, you need arbiter and optimism to figure out a trust, right? Like model, like of how do we trust each other? How do we work together? And then you have people with different proving systems, like, and then you ask like one ZK rollup and another ZK rollup whether they are comfortable with trusting each other's like backhand and hardware, and that like each of these rollups have a withdrawal window. So with all of this, like essentially challenges, it feels like it will take a lot of time for a lot of this like to come to fruition, for a lot of it to mature. I think Toggle had like a whole like bullet point list of like how many things we need for like ZK rollups to truly decentralize, and it was like, hey, we need like different proving systems, we need X, Y, Z, and it's like it will take time. And so what's the solution in the interim? I think like there's obviously a lot of bridging solutions which help a lot with that, but our thought process is like, hey, like what people want in terms of like blockchains rollouts is like what you mentioned is like more throughput, more scale, and how do we can work on that. And now we see that a lot of like app specific rollups are like essentially leading the charge of like next generation applications. And with that like in mind, like our thought process, like what if we just focus on our own ecosystem? What if we focus on our own network and make sure that the interaction there is as seamless as possible? And whatever comes to fruition on Ethereum side, we'll figure out how to integrate it. We'll watch like in terms of how it works. But our goal is that like each single application like only needs like milliseconds to compose with another application. So that's like essentially our target, and that we want to essentially see like to come to fruition right now and take it from there. But I think like the global composability layer across all rollups, I think it will take like a significant amount of time. But all these like little clusters, I think like in layer N, it will be an amazing experience. Superchain plans to come out with something next like quarter, or like in the quarter after that. And you have like elastic chain aggregation layer. But in the interim, I think like those like clusters will be dominating.
Awesome. So I had a question, like what would be a flow for someone who wants to build like a game? So someone wants to build chess on layer N, what would be their flow?
Yeah. Essentially, right now, like our material is like not fully open source, but the goal is like to open source all the tooling by the end of this quarter or like year. And essentially, from there, it will be super easy. You don't need to talk to me. You don't need to talk to anyone on the team. Maybe you don't like us, but just like what we're building. But today, it's like if you reach out, like we can offer you a stack to build an EVM application and have like a dedicated EVM environment for you to build your game with unlimited compute and all the nice metrics that like are available to you. Or like you can decide to build a Rust application, which is like gonna allow you to optimize it a lot better. It's a lot more closer to the metal. So there's a lot less like additional blockchain infrastructure in the middle. So that's like essentially another thing. But otherwise, like it will not be hard for you to adapt to build on there. And if you build Solana rollups, like you will find yourself familiar in the XVM environment. If well, not Solana rollups, just Solana applications. If you build an EVM, you'll find yourself familiar in the EVM environment. So there's no significant activation energy to come build with us, given whatever background you have in blockchain development. But what I would say is nice is that coming to layer N, like you don't need to worry about gas, you don't need to worry about compute units if you're from Solana, and you can just focus on your use cases, and you don't even need to worry about other applications like having some events which will like destroy your user experience in the meantime.
Gotcha. And sorry, I just want to like, so layer N is a stateless VM, right?
No, not necessarily. So essentially, it's like XVM is very similar to like any other VM. Like there's a state, there's like all the instructions, etc. It's just like geared towards like being as customizable as possible and as like bare metal as possible, because the goal is like not to let other applications launch their rollups, but more so like be the place for a single application to launch their app and use EVM and SVM for other environments.
Gotcha, that makes sense. And what are some applications you'd like to see people build in layer N
Yeah,
over
I mean,
the next 6 months?
yeah, I think like what I'm like personally the most interested one is like try to see people like take a lot of ideas from like years ago or this year and try to figure out like how we can actually make them functional, right? I think like DeFi had a ton of like different people like trying different ideas, but essentially like what came out of it is that like people realize, hey, it doesn't work. And I think like with more compute, with lower latency, with no gas, you can iterate a lot better. And that's like what I'm really excited about. Like take, for example, like AMMs, right? I think AMMs are not great for market making or providing liquidity for the end user who is like using to permanent loss. But with more compute, more data, more latency, I can market make any market with a lot more efficiency and actually make money. And we can actually replace, like, let's say, Ventromute jump in the blockchain ecosystem by autonomous protocols. Another one is like, let's say, different vault systems, which are you're using very primitive functions, like to try to provide yield to people. This can also be auto innovated. The same comes to games, like, and I can go on with this list more and more. But essentially, I think like a lot of ideas that we've tried in like the history of blockchains like can be revamped, relaunched, and like become sustainable, provide real revenue. And from there on, like we can also even start thinking about like what other things we can do, like what other things like we can innovate on. And like I just hope that like essentially with Layer and like we revive a lot of like hype around DeFi, around like a lot of this applications, and also can try a lot of different use cases in gaming, DeFi, etc., where like people care about cost as well.
Gotcha. And what are some applications which do not exist right now, which you would like to see?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I think we kind of like touched upon it. Like I think like market making rollups and permissionless vault systems which are like fully on chain, that could be really interesting, like from incentive perspective. I think a lot of any other protocol like around risk management, I think like having essentially better like lending protocols, better protocols like to even provide under collateralized lending to some people, like that can exist on layer N because like of like a lot more efficient risk management system. Like, so super excited about that. Really excited about like a lot of like gaming potential use cases where people can try out like whatever is built in Web 2, but built in Web 3 without like any issues.
Gotcha. And what has been your experience building with EigenLayer so far?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I think like going back to our stories, that like we build this like idea of like, hey, we need abundant DA, we need abundant data to essentially function. And I think like we even before knowing about EigenDA, we were like, hey, what if we post data to Solana? What if we post data like anywhere else? And essentially, like then a friend introduced me to Shriram, and it was like, hey, this is exactly what we need. And it was like really interesting experience, like of like finding it out, like was before even like knowing about it. You know, like you were looking for a solution and you finally found it.
Amazing.
So if someone is using Layer N and wants to interop with other infrastructure or other developer tooling or other things that we're just kind of used to, like wallets and block explorers and stuff like that, does Layer N require a different wallet, or can they use stuff like MetaMask? What does that look like? Because I think like when you look at the benefits often of building a rollup or an L2, or just inheriting an existing VM, a lot of the value proposition is that you can kind of reuse a lot of the things that are out there as opposed to having to build those from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, our goal first is to support MetaMask, and we actually plan to support Solana wallets down the line as well. And the goal there is like we want to make sure it's like we are as unaffiliated as possible, and we can attract as many people as possible from different ecosystems. Eventually, I think we are considering to have our own wallet, but the goal is like not to essentially like force people to use it, but more people want to make them to use it. Oh, sorry. But essentially, like we are not like opinion that like, hey, we need to have our own custom wallet because like so it's tailored to our own infra. You're more like, hey, how can we tailor our infra to existing solutions? Because the less friction there is for people to onboard to Layer N, the better.
Awesome. So we're gonna wrap it up here in just a moment, but yeah, I would just ask if you were going to give any advice to people that are out there listening that are considering building or starting their own company. Like, what are some things that you've learned along the way being a founder?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I really like what you were talking about, more infra, more apps kind of dilemma. And I think like what people are not tired of is like infra itself. It's like when infra doesn't have like a purpose, but it doesn't feel like it's clear, like why are we building this? Like what is going to lead to? And I think like what's important is like whenever you're building something, figure out like hey, like if it's an application, is there a demand for it? If I'm building an infrastructure, is there a demand for it? And is it leading to applications which have users using them? And that's kind of like, I think, like very underrated framework in crypto is that like we tend to forget like lost, the debate on research topics. But I think like that's like really crucial to highlight, really crucial to think about, so we can essentially double down on building something that's like actually useful for everyone and can actually lead to adoption. And I think like that we do need better infrastructure, but we need the infrastructure that's actually useful.
So if someone wants to get involved and maybe as a developer build something there or kind of learn more and keep up with what's happening, what are some things that they should do, be aware of in terms of like community, social media accounts, and developer docs?
In terms of building on their end,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I encourage everyone like to read our docs. Like we also get a release of white paper in the coming weeks. Like we should give like a deeper dive, but I would just encourage reaching out, like joining Discord or whatnot, like getting in touch with people. Like we are really eager to support anyone building on top of layer N, any applications, and that's essentially our number one job. Like onboard as many developers as possible, and we are trying to be as open to anyone as we can.
Will you be participating in like hackathons and in-person events in the future?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think like as like all our stuff is like open source, we'll probably launch multiple hackathons, and that's like essentially our end goal like as well. And that's like what we were thinking about.
Awesome. Well, if anyone's watching and they're participating in any hackathon in the future and they're building on Layer N when testnet and everything is out, you can also be eligible for the Infinite Hackathon building on any AVS or roll up on EigenDA. So you can win up to or earn up to $7,500 in additional bounties if you're considering, building on Layer N as part of your hackathon project. So definitely keep that in mind. We're excited about that initiative, and it seems to be going pretty well. I think we've had about 20 entries so far, and we've already doled out a couple of prizes there. So, Dima, yeah, this has been really great. I've learned a lot. Kind of went through, I think, quite a bit in a short amount of time. So, hopefully, a lot of other people learned a lot about Layer N. So, thanks for your time today.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, everyone that's stopped by, thanks for checking this out. We'll have another episode of Infinite Layers next week. And until then, you'll be able to catch this on YouTube if you missed the beginning of this. We'll drop a bunch of links there as well. So thanks for stopping by.